Hello, I'm Emily and I'm an educator at MOHAI, and this is Collection Connections Objects in Question, where we take a quick peek into Seattle history by taking a really close look at one item in our teaching collection to see what it can tell us about the past. Today, we're going to be exploring traditional Coast Salish homes, and this is our artifact. But first, let's have a think. So when I think of traditional Coast Salish homes, I am thinking of Native American communities whose ancestral lands are sort of around the Puget Sound area and also more north around the Salish Sea. And this includes many different tribes and nations. Here in South Lake Union, MOHAI sits on the ancestral lands of the Duwamish people. And I think of the importance of lands to these different communities and the relationships between the land and humans and non-human animals. And I think about what these lands look like. There's mountains and lots of waterways, tall evergreen forests, and really rainy, wet winters and dry, warm summers. And before Europeans and American settlers invaded these lands, Coast Salish people usually lived communally in longhouses or plank houses during the wet wintry seasons, which is most of the year, and then traveled for harvest and trade in the summer warm season. And then they were usually living in portable mat houses. And I also think about that word tradition in traditional Coast Salish homes, and traditions are ways of being or knowing that are passed down from one generation to the next, and they also change over time. So with the forced removal of Native people from their ancestral homelands, this meant that traditions changed. And nowadays, longhouses aren't really used for living in anymore, but they are still very important gathering spaces. What do you think about when you think about Coast Salish homes past and present? This is the object we'll be exploring today. Our first step is to use our senses to make as many observations as possible. So the very first thing that I notice is the material that it's made out of. It seems to be made out of wood. It's very hard and it's got a nice caramel color. I can also see the grain here as well. And it's not very big. It's maybe, 6 inches? It can fit in my hand. It's not super heavy. And I also notice kind of the shape of this item as well. It is kind of interesting. It's got this flat side here, and then this part is kind of cylinder shaped, and then it tapers and gets thinner over here, and it's got this flat end that also looks a little bit more worn than the other sides of the object. It's also, as we turn it around, you can kind of see that it's somewhat faceted, or it has lots of tiny different sides, kind of like a jewel, which to me is a clue that this was probably carved. And it also just kind of reminds me of a stake, something that you would maybe, like a tent stake that you would hammer into something else that's softer. It's got this pointy end here, and I can imagine it going down into something. So yeah. Look at that. So we've got a piece of cedar heartwood, and this is the innermost part of the cedar tree where the wood is no longer actively growing, and it's very durable, very strong wood. And we see that it's kind of curved on one side and flat on the other, and taking a look at this flat side, it's not totally even, but we can see the grain running up and down pretty flat, and this gives us a clue that the wood has kind of been split apart this way. So we've got the grain and it's been split apart. And that's exactly what this is used for. So this object is called a wedge, and it does what it's called. It's a wedge. It wedges things apart. So it's got this pointy end here, and you jam it into the end of a log, and you'd use several in a row in order to make a line and hammer it in with a stone hammer. And as this pointy end is traveling up into the log, it splits apart the log into planks. This piece is made out of yew wood or a yew tree, and it's much harder wood than the cedar tree is, so it's really great for splitting it apart. And also this method works really well with a super straight grain, which the cedar tree has. So this way you could get planks that were several feet wide and up to 25 feet long, which is super cool. What does this tell us about traditional Coast Salish homes? Well, it tells us a little bit about how they were made or built. And we learn a lot about the tools too. And I think this really shows us how the tools were designed to make the most out of very specific kinds of materials. And I think it also reflects a deep knowledge of the cedar tree and the different parts and what they're like and how they're related to each other. In another Collection Connections video, we also saw that the bark can be used for weaving, which is really neat. And so I'm really curious what other parts of the cedar trees can be used in different ways. What are you curious about? To explore some of your history questions or visit our online collection, you can go to the MOHAI website. That's mohai.org, mohai.org. And to learn more about longhouses, you can also visit one in person or virtually. The Duwamish Longhouse is located in West Seattle, and it's really great. So I definitely recommend you check them out. Thanks for watching.